Hello, and welcome to AWS Review, a week happening at AWS and how it may change how you do business. I am your host, Michael Krause. I am the Chief Technology Officer at Charter Solutions, where we help organizations change and innovate quickly by accelerating their acquisition and use of data.
And I'm your co-host, John Affelter. I'm a lead technical architect on the AWS specialist team at Salesforce, where I work with potential customers, helping them envision the possibilities that AWS and Salesforce enable.
All right. Thank you, John. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody back to a new episode of AWS Review. Today is another inaugural episode type. This is our IRL episode in real life, where we interview various people who are using AWS in real situations and learn a little bit about how they're leveraging AWS, some of the joys that they've had, and some of the pains that they've had, and maybe some of the things that you can do differently to help avoid some of the pitfalls. Today, we have Aaron Decker, head of engineering at Bounty, where they do influencer marketing. Aaron, welcome.
Howdy, thank you.
So tell us a little bit about Bounty and what they do.
So at Bounty, we're actually a Shopify app, and we let you turn your customers into influencer marketers. So if you're a customer at a Shopify store, and if you know Shopify, it's kind of like a white label e-commerce system. So if you're a big direct-to-consumer brand and you're not selling through Amazon, you're probably on Shopify or something like BigCommerce. But Shopify is the biggest one. So we're an app, and like on the Banky page, for example, after your customers purchase, we show a little widget that says, post this video or post this product to TikTok, get paid. So that's kind of our call to action there. And we have a pretty complex state machine that follows the customer all the way through of getting their order, getting it delivered, and then kind of prompting them over text messages to post a TikTok video. And then we track their TikTok video. We figure out how much to pay them based on how many views they got, and then we pay them out through Stripe Connect. So
that's very cool. How long has Bounty been around now?
Bounty has been around almost exactly 1 year. We got an angel check about a year ago, and then we've been on a wild ride ever since then.
It's been quite a few years for me, but I've worked in about 3 different startups in my life as well, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. So tell us a little bit about how you came to join Bounty.
So the CEO of Bounty is a guy named Abe Wolke, who I have known him for a very long time, but he got really into e-com. He's like an e-com marketing master. He was shopping this idea around. He got an angel check and kind of asked me about it. I roped some other people into it, or I got roped in by other people. I don't know. Anyway, so I'm one of the co-founders, but yeah, this is basically all Abe Wolke's brainchild. And it's a super hot space. We have like a lot of competitors. There's a lot of other people that got seed funding around the same time that we did over the last year. So, and we've gone, I think over the past year, we've raised about 6.5 million, and we have 12 employees now. I think we're going to have a 13th employee pretty soon.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, so, let's learn a little bit more about, I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
Oh, Aaron, I've obviously followed you guys since the inception, I guess.
Yep.
And, I just, wanted to hear, and you can dive into it a little bit more later too, but, how has the idea evolved, and what have you seen just from an idea standpoint, not even technology, but, just how you want to, kind of supply Bounty here to the world, I guess. How has that evolved since the beginning?
I think the main thing is the scope has just grown and expanded. I think we built about as much of an MVP as you could possibly build when we went live in February. And almost, I wouldn't say everything has changed about it, but a lot of things have changed to the point where like I had a lot of like strict relationships between entities in our database and kind of domain objects. And then a lot of what we've done over the last couple of months is like break them all so that you could do things in different ways and be more flexible. which is kind of interesting. um, so I think like basically we had this very narrow conception of what the product should be, and then you get it in front of customers and they start asking you to do all these different things, and then you have to be like more flexible and bring in kind of different like tools and flows and all kinds of things.
Yeah. Sorry, Michael.
Oh, no,
Sorry.
no, that's good. This is why we're doing it. So, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you and your background, right? We've heard a little bit about Bounty, but tell me a little bit about your history, your experiences, kind of, how you came to be who you are today.
Yeah, so I actually had a chemistry degree, and I started programming during undergrad. And I didn't work in chemistry very long. I just immediately tried to find a job as a programmer because I really enjoyed that a lot. I was doing that during like when I was doing some undergrad research, and then I've worked in all kinds of different random industries. I've worked for a medium-sized construction company doing iPad apps that were cross-platform and Flex, which is like something that we use as ActionScript, which I don't even think I'm not even sure if that's a thing anymore.
I definitely don't see it much anymore.
right, right. So that was a long time ago. But startups, I worked at a couple startups. I worked at a couple big Fortune 500 companies. I worked at an insurance company once, which I'll probably never do again in my life. It's very frustrating.
Shared pain there of insurance.
Yeah.
I think all three of us could probably have a beer over that one.
Yeah. It's all forms all the way.
I worked a project where we took commercial property and casualty insurance, like full multi-coverage kind of things,
Mm-hmm.
and fully automated every part of the quote underwriting process end to end. And boy, that thing took years.
I believe it. So I actually worked on a project that was commercial property and casualty. It was called like special. It was called alternative markets. It was at a big company in Cincinnati, and it was like all kinds of random things like liquor stores or casinos, and they had a relational database. It was an Oracle database, and the relational structure of these coverage policies, it would be like 50 tables to like represent a policy, and it was so many nested relationships. I mean, and I remember there was like some code that would copy one renewal to the next year, and it would go down in all these records and like replicate them all. Like nobody wanted to touch that code.
All I can say is that the company, one of the big insurance companies that I worked for, was based out of Cincinnati as well. So hopefully that wasn't code I wrote that you're dealing with.
It might be.
Well, serendipitous.
Exactly. So tell me a little bit more.
Yeah, I worked at Target for a while. I worked at Kroger, so I actually have like large company e-com experience. I worked in the back end of their kind of like e-com sites and apps. And after that, I did a lot of financial consulting. I worked for PwC for a long time, consulting on different. Did like a money laundering detection project, stuff like that. A lot of like small B2B stuff. So I've got some experience doing like very large, like high traffic, public facing stuff like at Target and Kroger. And then I've got some experience doing like really long term, like spinning up a proof of concept, getting it funded internally, and getting like a B2B kind of like whole like little system built, which are kind of enjoyable. But then the amount of traffic you get on like a big public facing thing is much more exciting. So we've got a little bit of a mix of both right now.
So you've done a lot of things. You've worked in a number of different industries. So is there a tool or skill that you kind of carry around in your toolbox from project to project as you're gone through your career? Something you really tend to rely on?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say one tool, but I'd say techniques. And I think that the biggest thing of that I really think about, especially like trying to manage an application in terms of like quality and from an ops perspective and all that is having good visibility into your system and having the ability to test it with real data. And as long as you have those two kind of things, it feels like you can maintain and continue to iterate on a good system. If you don't have one of those, or if you don't have either of them, it's a losing battle and everything's very difficult.
Definitely sage advice. John, you have any questions before we dive into some of the AWS stuff?
Yeah, I guess what have you learned, and maybe you'll get into this when you get into the AWS stuff, but have you learned any lessons from maybe looking at cost cutting or time cutting or time saving things ahead of time that you felt like might not have came back to bite you, but maybe ended up coming back and rearing its ugly head? And maybe that comes down to needing the real life data.
Um, in terms of like a little bit of work I could have done up front to save myself a lot of pain later,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, there's definitely stuff like that in AWS for sure. I'd say the security and like VPCs and setting everything up correctly definitely pays dividends.
I can believe that. I think that's a really good segue. Taking a look at the work you're doing today at Bounty, what are some of the key AWS services that you are relying upon?
So our backend is entirely Lambdas, um, and we use Aurora RDS. Where it's like it's a global compatible database, but we just have one cluster in one region right now. And we use CloudFront pretty heavily because there's a lot of like video downloads that we serve up, and a lot of static assets, and API gateway for Lambdas. And then I actually use EventBridge a ton.
Okay.
And SQS. A lot of stuff that we do, it's like a very large state machine, and it's moving a bunch of like payments around and triggering a bunch of like external API requests. So it's a lot of like SQS queues and making sure like things are flowing through this system in a timely
So,
manner.
so I'd love to unpack that one just a little bit, if you don't mind. Thinking about EventBridge and SQS queues, um, what made you lean in that direction versus something like step functions?
Well, I think that I've read a little bit about the AWS step functions, but I am a little bit hesitant to go like all in on something like that. So a lot of what our lambdas actually are like they're like express monoliths or koa monoliths, or they're not monoliths, but they're like it's like one API. It has all the APIs, and the API gateway is like a wild card. So we're not like leaning into those because I wasn't ever totally sold on using the lambdas for our traffic patterns, which I'm still not totally, and I'm like thinking about pulling some of the stuff out of lambdas, which I'll get to because there's other issues with lambdas, and then trying to go ECS with all that stuff. And I think that in terms of like managing all the state machines through that stuff, through step functions or whatever, I felt like it would be hard to go fast doing that.
Okay.
I felt like keeping the kind of state in the database, and the way that we have a lot of stuff set up is there's a status column, and then things move through statuses, and there's like logs to it. And if you do that with tables, it's actually very fast, and you can get visibility into it with queries pretty easily. It's like you can have a dashboard and see what the status of everything is and build a funnel chart.
Very cool.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and it's I personally I've worked with both some, and I'm kind of like you. I've leaned away from step functions. They have their place, but I found in larger complex systems they impose a little bit of inflexibility. You think a state machine, they're very good for defining a state machine, but they're very good for defining a state machine and sticking to that, right?
Yeah.
If you need
Yeah.
higher flexibility, or you need to be able to branch off other actions based on things, that's where leveraging something like Event Bridge and taking more of an event-driven system is I've found a very helpful thing. So you're using Aurora, um,
Mhm.
Aurora, not serverless Aurora, standard instance-based Aurora.
Standard instances, Postgres. Yep.
Okay, and then so tell me a little bit about how you came to that decision relative to using something like MongoDB or DocumentDB or Dynamo or some other NoSQL type solutions.
Um, we actually have a stack that is 100% TypeScript. It's TypeScript on the back end with Lambdas and TypeScript on the front end with React.
Okay,
And the stack that we designed that we thought would be very fun, which has been fun in some ways and has been nice in some ways and difficult in others, it's like we're living the dream. It's all the same code all the way through. I can use the same libraries. It's a mono repo, so I don't even have to version anything. Like everything just compiles correctly, and I can reference one library on the client and one on the server, as long as I know that I don't have like weird stuff in the import path. I'm fine. But the real special thing we were going to try to do was take this library called Prisma, which is an ORM, and it lets you write a schema file that you generate your database from. Mm-hmm. And you can do, versioning and migration, all that nice stuff from that. But it puts out a TypeScript type library, and then I can use all those types on the back end. And then we actually expose them in the GraphQL resolvers, because we use GraphQL.
Okay.
And we actually flow those types all the way from the database straight up to the client on the React code. So it's literally the same types all the way through. And it's amazing, but it causes some difficulties.
Yeah, I was going to say, it reduces the amount of marshalling and unmarshalling in a custom way that you have to do.
Yeah. It's actually like, oh, we're like living the dream. Everything just works automatically. And I can add a new database table and like add a new result, and all the types are just there. I don't have to do anything.
So where does it break?
Well, it breaks if you want to encapsulate logic away from the client, or hide fields and stuff. Like one thing that we use sometimes are JSON columns, mm-hmm. because you might have, Postgres is an amazing relational database. It has an amazing set of features. It's fast, it's performant. It has JSON columns that you can query down inside with a query language. And then, so it's like the best of Mongo, but you actually get a good relational database, not whatever Mongo is. The problem is now you have to type those JSON columns. You have to be careful about what you're exposing to the client. We use something called Zod, which is a schema library, and you can validate JSON schemas. So I find myself like wanting to override the types and like hide stuff from the client a lot. Yeah, this is like a blog post I've been distilling in my head around like, yeah, we tried to do this thing, it was amazing, except like when it's not.
So then kind of moving forward from Aurora, are you connecting directly to Aurora from the Lambdas or using RDS proxy?
So that has been a very big issue for us. Prisma, it does a lot of stuff in transactions. And RDS proxy, if you do transactions, it does connection pinning with Postgres and Prisma. It's just the way that Prisma library works. So if we use RDS proxy, I don't really think it would give us anything. And then Prisma came out with a product to solve this called Prisma Data Proxy.
Okay.
Except we're using some of their non-GA features, such as interactive transactions, which I don't know how you do like logic where you're updating a payment in one table and updating a sum in another table. Like, I don't know how you do math safely with payments across several tables without an interactive transaction
Yeah.
in a way that I would feel comfortable with on a thing that deals with real money, and without a hell of a lot of like recovery logic if you
Right.
fail. So
Not very acid.
yeah, I've been very hesitant to give that feature up to go use Prisma Data Proxy. So I actually have PG Bouncer cluster running in ECS
Okay.
just
Okay.
in case we run out of connections. But right now we just have a very, very large database that we will not exhaust connections on.
Are you doing
So,
any sort? Well, go ahead, John.
oh, you had stated that you were looking at moving some of the lambdas out and utilizing ECS. What
Yeah,
is what I guess what's driving that, and what do
that's
you
one of the reasons
yeah
the connection pool issue.
yeah
So we have the lambdas say like the connection pool limit is 2 on every lambda, so they can't like open a ton of connections. But I mean that's not great for other reasons. Like what if they get they're probably not getting a bunch of simultaneous requests where they've got open things in. I don't think that the architecture would actually allow that for the most part. But um, I've seen them time out before, like occasionally on one of our lambdas that does like multiple database things at the same time, like in parallel. So I've had to increase the connection limit on some of the lambdas and like increase the timeout of the connection pool on some of them. I would really just love to have a server that sticks around and just has a nice big connection pool and doesn't exhaust my connection.
So, John, we should dig up the earlier episode we did and share that with Aaron. So, we did an episode where we looked at cost of operating on
I,
Lambda versus ECS Fargate and ECS EC2.
I was going to
Mm-hmm.
bring that up earlier
Yeah,
actually.
and it was an interesting analysis because what we learned is Lambda is a heck of a lot cheaper until you hit about 12 transactions per second. Then Fargate and especially Fargate Spot become way cheaper than Lambda.
Yeah, yeah,
And
and there's like a lot of other issues that you just are not an issue with
right, right.
Mhm.
the normal server like kind of paradigm.
Yeah, Lambda works really well in a lot of different scenarios, but there's also a lot of scenarios where it really is not the best solution.
I think it would be great if we like leaned really hard into Dynamo or something,
Hmm.
which is what everybody says ever on the internet. And then I always like I have this problem with our RDS instance, and I talk to people about they're like, why don't you just use Dynamo? I'm like, that's like the
Classic.
least realistic thing I've ever had heard suggested at this point. Like this, the whole application is using a relational database.
I've got a company that I've been working with recently who has historically been a relational database company, and they're really getting into some scale in AWS, and they've been starting to switch certain things to Dynamo, and this is a learning curve for them because
Yeah,
they've never used it before. And I still remember recently we did a fairly significant load test, bigger load than they have ever put on anything in the past. And they came back and said, there's something wrong. I said, well, why do you say that? They said, well, latency in Dynamo went down as the load went up. I went, yeah, it's because the number of nodes they allocate to you is based on the consumption of read and write units. So as you go up, you get more capacity, more capability. Like, oh wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, no, I think Dynamo is always the go-to for scale, and there's a lot. Michael, to your point, there's a lot of other nuances that come in when you switch to a NoSQL database from a relational one, and
Yeah,
especially
and there's
when it's
there's a lot of
operational
challenges.
ones.
There's a lot of
Yeah,
challenges too. I mean, reporting
yeah,
is really tough because it's hard to find a reporting system that talks to Dynamo.
yeah. I
yeah.
remember working on my MongoDB. This is MongoDB, but I remember working on my MongoDB homework back when I was still in college, and I called you and trying to figure out all of these NoSQL queries that we're trying to do, and it's just it can be a nightmare of just logic and like trying to really dig down into the nest, I guess. So I don't know if
Yeah,
you remember
yeah.
that.
It's hard because like Dynamo, when you're looking at it, you're like you have to design query first, right?
Yes,
Yep.
yes, you do.
But and because I've worked on other large NoSQL systems like Cassandra systems before, and it's just like a very different mode of thinking, and it works well at scale. Like once you're already at scale and the product's mature, I feel like. But I mean, we do like 2 database migrations a week. Like we're actively evolving this product really fast, and it's very helpful to have like, you know, a super flexible relational database. That said, I have like one table with a bunch of indexes on it. That's kind of it's getting like incredible amounts of volume into it every day. I'm gonna put that in Dynamo.
Yeah. There are some things where Dynamo is just like the right answer,
Yeah, yeah,
and there are other places where a relational model makes more sense. I actually a couple of years ago actually recommended that a company move from Dynamo to Aurora because
yeah,
of what they were due to 2 reasons. One is their problem set was actually a better relational problem set, but the other piece was everybody on the team had heavy relational experience and nobody had NoSQL experience, and they were trying to treat Dynamo as a relational database, which brought all their performance just completely down.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
So,
they're doing like a lot of scans instead of index lookups or something.
well, and they were trying to do joins, and they had to do them all in
Yeah.
memory because there's no join capability.
Don't joins.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we took a look at doing a kind of multi-schema tables, a single table design, but for their needs, it didn't make sense.
And
Yeah, yeah,
Aaron, I know that you've talked about just different scaling issues, and obviously you guys are growing super fast. So, talk to me about some of the things that you've had to face with scaling and some of the ways that you've overcome that.
yeah. So I think the one thing I already hit on was the connection limit issue, which um, you know, I think RDS is just not a good thing for lambdas at scale. It's not a good idea. So we're switching our high traffic stuff over there. Um, we had like a lot of stuff that we just kind of threw in, and then all of a sudden it was getting a lot of traffic. Like we had a lambda that was it was connected to a database that was doing stuff with events, which we didn't really need. Like we just kind of dumped that completely and piped it through some API that dumps it onto Snowflake. There's just like a lot of little things like that, and then we have one endpoint that like we're on the client side of a lot of Shopify stores, and Shopify stores, they get tons of traffic because they're directing paid ad spend there. So like, that's the whole point of a e-com store. So we have a couple of snippets of code that get loaded on like every page load on a lot of different product pages on a lot of stores. And I actually we have like a couple of different mechanisms there to deal with that. One of them is we actually cache the result on the client, like in the browser's memory, and then we cache it in their local storage too. And then we also cache in memory on the lambdas, just in like, because the lambdas actually live a long time. So we have a small in-memory cache there. And the reason why it's all like in memory and stuff is because we want the latency to be as low as possible, because it has to get the data before it paints the page. So I'm trying to get like less than 50 milliseconds of latency everywhere. And then the other one is that I'm actually going to the read replica whenever I can there. So I'm not going to like the main node.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. If you were splitting your reads and writes between your primary node and your read replicas.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing now on those high traffic endpoints.
That's awesome.
And aren't you, when you get all that data from Shopify, doesn't it sometimes all come in at once, and you have to deal with a lot of it at
Oh
once?
yeah. That's a whole other. So like, the way that our system works is we wait until the user's order is delivered before we like do our drip campaign to tell them to like post a video. So we have to listen to fulfillment events on orders. Now, we get like 25,000 orders a day into the system, but each of them that like does like 20 fulfillment events over their lifetime. So like we're getting, you know, on average like a couple 100,000 fulfillment events a day, at least, if not more. But that's not really a problem if they trickled in, right? Like that's not actually that much traffic. But the problem is they don't trickle in; they burst in all times, like 5,000 simultaneous requests. Um, so originally we were just doing like plain HTTP webhooks, which if you burst in 5,000 simultaneous HTTP requests, it tries to spin up 5,000 lambdas, and then it tries to spin up 5,000 database connections. So that doesn't work very well, as you can imagine. And I don't know. I don't know if it's like USPS doing this or like UPS. I can't figure out which shipper is doing this exactly. But it's like, and there's some apps that do this on some of the Shopify stores. Like they'll burst in tons of events all the time. Uh, so we actually have a direct event bridge partner connection with Shopify. They let you register with their app as an event source through AWS, and they also support GCP.
Okay.
But we're in AWS, so we're using, it's like a event bridge event source, and they stream through these JSON payloads. We have them go into an event bus, and then we're directing them into our SQS queue, and it's a standard SQS queue that a Lambda processes them, and then it doesn't like overwhelm stuff even if they burst it.
Yeah, I was going to say I was wondering if you'd taken that approach to use EventBridge or
Yeah,
SQS as a
yeah.
land.
Luckily they support it.
Yeah.
Always, and I think it's funny, Aaron. I think when we first started talking about that, I was just like, just never forget about SQS, the old friend.
Yeah,
It's always, I mean, it's, what is it, the oldest AWS service other
Not
than,
quite, but close.
yeah, it's like one of the top, yeah, top three or something. But, I know you too, Michael. You've leaned on SQS and a lot of things.
Oh,
It's
I
just, it really is it's a good thing to set up resiliency and,
Well, it's a
you
good
know, I,
thing to buffer legacy and less scalable systems from the peaks. It's like you were saying, Aaron,
yeah,
generating a ton of database connections all at once is problematic, right?
right.
But if the information coming in can be consumed at a slightly slower rate, you could minimize the number of lambdas and just chug through it.
Yeah,
You can
yeah,
peak at you and then you just consume it down over a little bit longer time.
yeah. And even the fact that if their HTTP webhook, it's putting one request over HTTP is like one JSON payload, but on my SQS queue, I batch into 20 events, and my one Lambda invocation does 20 events at a time, and it's like still does it in like 1 second.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So let's kind of talk a little bit about we've started to look at some challenges. You know, one of the questions I was thinking about is kind of the biggest problem that you and your team have solved in the last year. But I'm afraid we may have touched on it, so I'm going to toss it out there anyway. But I'll see if we've already touched on this problem in the conversation at this point.
Yeah, I think that probably one of the biggest problems was realizing that like we scaled very fast, and then there was kind of an impedance mismatch between like the RDS and lambdas
Mhm.
essentially, which we're just like at this point we're like mitigating, and then eventually like maybe some of them will move into ECS. But the fact is, I love them for like we have one project called the job processor, and it's the thing that processes everything through these state machines and triggers all these events or response to events. That one I just love having in lambdas because a lot of the things are like query the database for this, still in SQSQ, process in SQSQ, and like that stuff will just scale. I don't know. I don't know when I'll have problems with it. It'll just scale though. Like
Yep.
it's going to be fine for like a year or two.
Yeah, and that's actually really a really cool thing. So you've had some challenges, obviously. So when you think back, of the work at Bounty, and maybe even some of the work before, what in general do you find to be the biggest pitfalls that you've seen with AWS? And what would you kind of say to our listeners about how they should think about these things in order to avoid them?
I think that we did a lot of stuff where we just kind of like threw architecture in there without um, thinking long term about how it should go. And like for example, we didn't put the lambdas into VPC, and then we had to like keep the database exposed to the public internet for a while, which was not great. And then getting them into a VPC later was a big problem. Like it's just like if we would have like stopped and slowed down a little bit at the beginning, it would have saved us a lot. And it's like a huge headache to fix later. Just things like that.
Yeah, stop, pause, think about it a little bit ahead of time.
Yeah,
Down to speed up.
plan out the architecture better.
Yeah. What are you using for observability?
So we have a couple of different tools we use. Um, we actually use we have a Slack bot, and this is going to sound silly, but it's like extremely useful. And all throughout our backend code, it's
Doesn't
peppered
sound
with.
silly to me.
Okay, all throughout
Bias, I guess, maybe, but
all throughout the backend code, it's peppered with Slackbot notifications, and then we just have a stream. It's just called. There's one for the brand side, one for the user side, and it's just an activity feed of like stuff happening in the app, and you can just kind of look at that and see errors happen, like see if things are not working in the right order. Like I actually love this. I think it'll be great. Probably like for another couple years, maybe. I don't know how much traffic it'll be before it quits being useful, but it's actually just extremely useful to see an event stream and stuff in like one place. But yeah, so we use CloudWatch. I have it all going into Grafana, and then I have alerting done in Grafana, and I have like a couple of dashboards that I can view all the lambdas across every region and everything in Grafana, and we have Metabase, which like our product people, like our head of product uses, some of the support people use Metabase to look at, which kind of, it's like a way to like pull in your relational database, and like they don't really have to write queries, they can just kind of like build views into things.
Oh, very cool.
And then I use Retool super heavily for the ops team. Like almost everything, like they almost never have to make an engineering support ticket or something to escalate it. Like every time there is one, I just make a Retool app for them to go and then fix whatever they need to fix and see whatever they need to see. And like if they need to look up a user, they have a dashboard they can look up users with. If they need to look up a store and or see some payment or like something with a video, like they can go in and see all that.
So Retool is just talking directly to Aurora.
Yep.
Yeah, awesome.
And then if there's business logic that has to happen, that's like more complex than just going straight to the database, like it needs to go through our code. So it's that common business logic. We have endpoints that are exposed like only to Retool's like whitelisted IP addresses.
Okay.
yeah, you remember me trying to sell you on Retool a long time ago, don't you, Michael?
I do, and I think it's actually a really great tool, but for our uses and our clients, it didn't make a lot of financial sense.
Yeah.
I mean, for Aaron's use, it's perfect.
Yeah, it's internal tooling is what I'm using it for.
Yeah.
So it's perfect.
And that's a good segue because I guess I was going to ask, what are some of these tools and maybe not even Retool specifically, but what are some of the things that you think you've kind of hit on a few of them already, but things that are going to work now for the team size that you have and the fact that there's only one of you and you have a smaller engineering team to when knock on wood, when Bounty grows to a huge multi-million-dollar company. So.
Right. We raised the Series A, and like all of a sudden we have the budget to hire another 5 or 6 engineers, and then now all of a sudden I need another engineering manager.
Yep.
I'm trying to think, like, definitely, we're using GitHub for project management right now. Well, we actually use Notion to do a lot of stuff, and Notion is extremely customizable. We have like databases in Notion that we create our product tickets and everything. But on GitHub, we're doing, we're kind of running our daily like Kanban stuff with the GitHub issues. That'll be interesting to see if that scales and if we have to use some actual like ticketing system like Jira or whatever.
Salesforce maybe, or
Like what?
Salesforce? No.
Like Salesforce? Yeah.
No plugging, John. No plugging.
We're already using Salesforce, so I think we'll keep using that on the sales side.
Yeah. I always have one shameless plug in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So Aaron, kind of looking back, AWS changes things a lot. They're always coming up with new releases, new features, new capabilities. What kind of three things, and it doesn't have to be three, it could be two or one if you can only come up with that many, but what things have you changed your mind about with regard to AWS?
Actually, I think Lambdas was one of them. I was very skeptical of them at first, and I've experimented with them over the years. And this was like the first big project that I've gone in with this architecture on.
Very
which maybe is not a big endorsement because some of it's working and some of it's not. But like most of it's working. Like I'm actually very happy with almost all the architecture except for like some of the high traffic stuff.
Excellent.
And I think that that kind of comes back to your point too, Michael, is that there's a lot of things that work to a certain point, and then the other technologies start to work for some of those certain situations as well.
Yeah, and knowing the box that things work in, I've been an AWS user for a long, long time, and it's only recently that I've changed my mind on EventBridge.
Yeah,
EventBridge in the past was really limited in what its capabilities, and now they've actually converted it into a true event bus.
And that's another one I was pushing. I was selling to you for a while.
Yeah, well, we're using the event bus feature now, so it's pretty nice. It's pretty nice. Actually, I had to move some stuff from one region to another, and it was super easy because I just kept the one like event source in the one region. I just pointed it to the other one, and everything. It was like seamless.
Yeah, and the structure, the structure of rules, the amount of specificity you can put in your rules to subscribe to certain events, and just the sheer number of destinations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you could send it to an SQ, absolutely. But you can actually call APIs. You can send those events to a lot of different places. It creates a lot of flexibility in how you might architect some of those flows, especially relative to, like we were talking about earlier, things like state machines built on step functions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think if there's one thing.
Oh, it sounds like we lost John.
Lost him.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll be back. I'm sure he'll be back. All right. So, it's we've been going for a little while here, and I think it's probably time for us to start wrapping up. John's back. Hey, John, welcome back.
Hey, sorry. What I was saying is if you start seeing a lot of blogs about something, usually it starts getting a lot more features. So.
Awesome. So, Aaron, in kind of, it's starting to wrap up here. If you had to pick one resource, one book, one website, one blog, one podcast, obviously ours, that you would recommend for new or experienced AWS people, what would it be?
So I'll say something that is specific to serverless because that's kind of what we're actually using the serverless framework with AWS.
Which, by the way, I love.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. We're doing some stuff in CDK right now.
Okay.
But I actually really love serverless still. So one person's blog that is very helpful is Alex DeBree's blog. Okay. We actually hired him to do a little bit of consulting for us and make sure things were looking good. But he used to work for serverless. He has a good blog on serverless stuff. And I actually don't like the serverless documentation that much, but they have a massive repo of examples on GitHub of just different code examples, and those have been some of the most helpful things to do different tests.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is awesome. It's interesting. You really need to get to know serverless to really understand all of the sugar it brings to the table. But it's a very powerful tool set. So, Aaron, where can people find you online?
So my website is ard.ninja. I have a blog there, infrequently updated, and Bounty is bounty.co.
Excellent. Well, Aaron, I'd love to thank you for joining us today and sharing some of your experiences. Hope everything goes awesome for you at Bounty, and would love to check in again sometime in the future and see how things are going.
Thanks. Yeah, sounds good.
All right. With that, we're going to sign off for today. And I'd like to say thank you to all the listeners out there. Hopefully, you've enjoyed this session. We'll be coming up with more interviews in the future. Thank you
My
again.
favorite one so far.